Hello, and welcome to I'm a Fan of That, a podcast about all things fandom, told through objects, stories, and studies, with a bit of silliness thrown in along the way. Your hosts on this journey are Dr. Vivian Asimos, public anthropologist and pop culture academic, and me, pop culture writer and journalist, all-round enthusiast, Holly Swinyard. Join us as we deep dive into the wonderful and wacky world of fan culture, its history, the people who make it up, and the way we look at this ever-growing part of our society. Fair warning, we may well talk about some adult themes, use some adult language, and possibly get a bit nerdy about the whole thing. You have been warned.
Hello and welcome to I'm a Fan of That. Why did I do a little clicky thing?
I don't know, now. Because you are an 80-year-old man.
Yeah.
In a 30-year-old non-binary body.
It's because I want to be a DJ on Radio 4. No. Or whatever, I don't know.
You're listening to Smooth XM.
Anyway, welcome to I'm a Fan of That, where we explore the wonderful world of fandom and pop culture through objects that we love. Except this week's object is a bit weird.
Of course it is.
A little bit strange. I feel like the objects element of this has gone a little bit off the rails.
You know.
It's the format, we're keeping it, we're going to push on. Anyway, I'm Holly, I'm here, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I'm Vivian, and I'm also here. What's up? Yeah. I have the object today.
You do?
Yes. Because basically, I mean, this is a bit of a story. We're not going to get into the actual specifics of what this is because, I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, basically, for people who don't know, my father is now a retired, but he worked as an NCIS cold case homicide detective. He was amazing at his job, did some really cool cases, got awards for them. He's very humble about it. He listens to this podcast. He will probably be very... reddened by me chatting about this. I didn't know he listened until one time he just sent me a message being like, "Oh, I heard that you sold books on your podcast. Cool." I'm like, "Oh, what's up?"
Amazing. That's so funny.
But basically, I have been considering whether or not to do a true crime-esque book using one of my dad's cases. I wasn't sure if he would be up for it. He was up for it, and so he sent me some stuff. And so I thought this would be a really funny object because when I got them in the mail, I was like, are you serious? Which I haven't told him about this yet, so this will be news to him. But he sent me, these are, CD, DVD, overwrite info, how we used to do in 2004?
Yep.
When we would have reams of these. But they are unmarked, and they have case files on them.
The most redacted item.
And it was one of those where I got it, and I was like, am I a spy in the Cold War? I don't understand.
At least he didn't send you, a mini disc or something.
You know, like a microfiche. Yeah.
Yeah. You're there, looking at the film, oh, yes.
I was able to access the files, and it has been a very strange and weird experience going through it, which I'm sure maybe I can talk a little bit about potentially. Because it's odd to see your dad in police files.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you're reading a police file, and then it's like, oh, that's my dad.
Yeah. For those people who haven't guessed, we're doing true crime.
We're doing true crime today.
As a fandom thing.
Yeah, so that's why I don't know how much we're going to actually talk about my dad's cases, but there's a reason why I was interested in doing a true crime book, and so that's, I think, where I will probably talk a little bit about it. Mm-hmm. Are you a true crime fan?
Sort of. I like a unsolved... I don't mean conspiracy theory, that's not quite what I mean. I love a sort of, a
mysterious...
Bigfoot,
Oh, okay, yeah.
That kind of stuff, where it's a bit more mysterious, all that kind of thing, where it's not necessarily like cryptids. I mean, I love cryptids. Of course I love cryptids. But I also like your kind of D.B. Cooper, that kind of stuff, where it's like, oh, a guy jumped out of a plane with loads of money and no one ever saw him again. What happened to him? It's like, he's probably dead. Let's make up loads of cool ideas. It's so weird. I really like those kind of ones. I listen to a lot of true crime kind of gangster gangland stuff as well. I've always been quite interested in that kind of thing. There's a great podcast on the BBC called Gangster, which goes into stuff like that, where they did things like the gold heist and stuff. I tend not to like things that are too recent, unless it's like a funny crime. Like, I don't know if you've heard about the golden toilet that was stolen from, I think, Blenheim Palace.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the piece of art, yeah. Like, that one, that's funny, and actually no one got actively hurt in it. So, okay, cool, that's quite entertaining. But, like, your kind of murdery, gruesome ones, unless they're, like, 100 years ago, I tend not to go in for that, because I'm like, it's too modern. Even then, I kind of tend to urge the, Victorian and back. Even turn of the century, I find, is a little bit too close for the goriest ones, because it's a bit like, oh, that was a person. I mean, it's always a person, but you know what I mean. Like, there's kind of enough of a disconnect to be like, history.
Yeah. Like, their descendants aren't like,
that
was my mom. It was like,
like I think I have a bit of an issue with the kind of the true crime stuff where it's like, this happened last year and we're going to investigate it. I'm like, are you unqualified human? Like, that kind of stuff. I'm not. So last year for my birthday, Egg took me to see one of my favorite podcasts live, which is Drunk Women Solving Crimes, which is exactly what it says on the tin. Basically, they talk about cases that happened, almost always historical, mostly ones that are kind of either a bit weird or kind of amusing, and they get drunk while reading out the story and kind of vaguely deciding what they think happened and all that kind of stuff. It's very entertaining. They're comedians. Like, I like that. That's kind of fun,
Yeah.
But I am not a gorehead kind of into the darker stuff kind of true crime person. But I can see why people are. It's the same thing as like horror, right?
I used to be. And I was a fan of the very particular type. I mean, we're talking a lot about podcasts because, let's be honest, it's a lot of podcasts.
In the current iteration,
yes.
I would say so, yeah.
As of right now, I think when people say they're into true crime, I always assume they mean either documentaries or podcasts or both. But basically, I used to listen to a lot of true crime podcasts that were a little bit more gory, but I had the distinct interest in, like, the more comedians talking about it, which I know is ethically questionable for a lot of people. I think I chose good ones. I used to listen to one that I thought was particularly bad. I listened to I listened to it a couple of times and it got like worse and worse. And I was like, oh, this now feels icky to listen to. And so I turned it off and stopped listening. But some of the other ones, one of them in particular, the last podcast on the left, actually started really icky and then got way better as they continued. And when I stopped listening to them, it was only because they swapped to Spotify only, and so I just stopped listening to them. But it was one of those where if you went back and listened to their really early ones, it felt way worse, but they were kind of people who learned and listened to feedback and got better, which I always really appreciate from people. The other one that I really enjoyed was Small Town Murder, for people who know about it. They also had another one that was Crime and Sports, which were a lot more goofy and stupid, and it was normally like coke rages from famous sports people that then destroyed their life, even though they were super rich and famous and well loved, because so those were fun to listen to, because
to give you an idea of Drunk Women Solving Crime, they did like Cocaine Bear before it was a film and stuff like that. Like, that's the kind of stories they were doing, or very historical ones, like ones from like the 1600s about they thought this person was a witch, I kind of feel like there's an element of, again, witch burnings, not fun, but there is that slight goofy thing of things from history where you go, oh wow, don't we know better now? And then you go, no we don't.
No we don't.
We're stupid.
I think the thing
continue to be stupid.
I think the thing with true crime is, at least as of right now in its current iteration, I do find that a lot of people who have been socialized female or are female bodied, I think, tend to be more drawn to it. And I think that's because we are typically the victims in these kinds of crimes. And there is something oddly fascinating about knowing the different pitfalls and kind of knowing where to get out of things. Speaking of my father, when I was probably, I don't know how young I was for this. Maybe I was of an appropriate age. I'm not sure. No, to be fair to him, he doesn't really talk about his job. He only just started talking to me about it now that I'm like 30 something years old. And even then he's very hesitant about it. I get it. He doesn't want to bring home stuff like that to a nice, loving family that is alive and happy.
It's understandable, kind of, to be fair.
I get it. I totally get it. But there was a point in my life, I don't remember how, I was probably in high school, let's be fair to him, that he told me that if I ever get attacked, to try to scrape at my attacker as much as possible, because then the DNA would be under my fingertips, which means that they'd be able to test for that when trying to figure out who did anything.
Well, there we go. Hot tip of the day.
I know, kind of gruesome, but at the same time, incredibly useful to know. Yeah. Like, and these are the kinds of things I think you pick up when you listen to it, not just from, you know, your dad, but like you would hear about like, oh, she scraped at him and then that's why we were able to figure out that this guy did it, or she stole this thing, or she dropped something on the way to hint to something. Like, you pick up on those things. One of my favorites was that I learned from one of them how to check to make sure that somebody at your door is actually a cop. And this was particularly in America, of basically the people, the particular victim was taken in by it, but then the people reporting on it were like, this is how, like, what you should do if you were in this position. And it's like, oh, well, that's incredibly useful, because I might be in that situation.
I think a lot of people think this is a really modern thing, that this obsession with true crime, because of podcasts. Like you said, people, podcasts, documentaries, that kind of stuff. But true crime books have been a thing for a very long time. Probably since we have printed newspapers, people were like, what's happening? You know, there have been sort of executioners, pamphlets, and lists of crimes and all that kind of stuff. That goes back a very long way. Also, my absolute favourite thing, which I found out through... Of course, it was Greg Jenner, my favourite public historian, Greg Jenner. I mention him every episode. In his book, where he was talking about how in Tudor England, if a crime happened, the playhouses, so the theatres, would be frantically writing a play of the crime that they could put on during the week that it had happened, getting all the information from like the gossip and the courts and all this kind of stuff to put it on, so that then people could come and watch a play of the crime that might have happened like just down the road, because they wanted to get the information. So it was almost like a news broadcast almost, but like a salacious kind of you know, half truth sort of version of it, with all the best gory bits like pushed up to the top of, you know, the surface, or kind of, or added extra. Like that was not uncommon. You know, your Penny Dreadfuls and all that kind of stuff were all not necessarily all based on true crime, because obviously a lot of them were fantastical kind of things. But you have things like Spring Heel Jack in there and stuff like that, and obviously Jack the Ripper. And so you kind of all the way through from the, you know, the Tudor playhouses to music hall, you have these things where people are doing it. And then folk songs, of course. Folk songs are telling the stories of highwaymen and, you know, this is, we were obsessed with it. Pirates, highwaymen, robbers who escaped from the Tower of London, all this kind of thing. That we love it. We're obsessed with it. Everyone loves reading about it. There was that, I've forgotten his name. There was a very famous criminal in Georgian England who managed to escape from, I want to say, 4 or 5 jails before getting caught. And it was like his thing, that he'd do a crime and get caught on purpose because he could escape. And then eventually, obviously, he got hanged for it. But
he would love escape room.
I know, he would. It would be a much safer, or just escapology, you know, Houdini style. There are ways to do this stuff. But yeah, like that's, I think people go true crime and think, you know, the podcasts and documentaries and these very in-depth investigations. But I think it comes from a long history of telling each other what's happening, and these versions of like people would go down to the pub or whatever, the local communal space, and there would be singing about, you know, the local highwaymen. There'd be songs, or there'd be gossip, or, you know, you'd have, like I said, a play or something, or once you've got the printing press, the, you know, the gossip sheets. It wasn't just, you know, Bridgerton style romance gossip sheets, guy. It was like, someone's been murdered horribly, most foul, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's not modern. I would probably say it's probably something humans have always gone, someone was terribly killed, my goodness, tell me.
I mean,
all
even
about
just looking at, like, you know, the way that humans have always enjoyed an execution for some ungodly known reason. Like,
I'm wondering if enjoy is the right word.
Well, but there's I think there's a fascination to it.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if it's inherently tied to this. I don't know. I think it's I mean, I'm not a criminologist, so that's not my specialty when it comes to sociology and anthropology.
Just as another thing, if anyone is interested in a criminologist talking about true crime, Bad People on BBC is very good and worth listening to, because they will tell you the brain stuff. But anyway, there you go. There's a recommendation.
But I think
maybe we do like true crime. Maybe we
I
do.
think there's a certain level of like a combination of the fear of death and a kind of combining with a kind of fascination for the breaks in societal norms. Like, we know we're not supposed to kill people, and we know we're not supposed to heist diamonds, and we're not supposed to, you know, attack rich people, but we kind of like the idea of it sometimes.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, look at what happened with the alleged healthcare murderer, Luigi Mangione. Alleged, he is innocent till proven guilty. There is, honestly, at the moment, people are obsessed with him because he allegedly Robin Hooded the shit out of this, essentially.
Yeah.
Robin Hood. There you go.
Yeah.
What? These are things people have been obsessed with. So I also think you were right with that thing of modern true crime in particular, but with the thing of women and female-bodied humans. And I'm going to include the woman umbrella here, because obviously we have a lot of people in this spectrum do tend to be the ones who are victims in these things, because society, that idea of how do you stop this happening to you, or how do you make sure the person is caught if it does, those kind of thoughts. I think that's the same thing with executions and public punishments, is that thing of how do I make sure this doesn't happen to me. If I go and see it, I can learn, and then, you know, I think there is, I don't know if it's conscious, but that same idea of maybe if I know about it, it won't happen to me. I wonder if that's there too, a sort of learning element to it. It is fascinating how much we are obsessed with
the end, but a gruesome, and that's the murder, because I think there's also, because there's lots of different types of true crime, like you said, like you're more fascinated in like the heisty bits and the kind of fun. I love a heist too. Yes, there's a podcast that I really like called Do Go On, and they do a lot of just stories from history, but they're like, they love a heist, and they'll always do like heist stories and mystery narratives, and they tend to not do too many like bloody, gory crime stuff. They do a lot more of the someone robbed a bank or robbed a rich guy or heisted a load of diamonds. And
I think true crime gets a really bad rap for this thing of just being, it is, you think of true crime and you think the bloody gory stuff, and even like you think of true crime books, a lot of the time they are sort of salacious. Oh, she was kidnapped and murdered and then they found her head kind of things, you know. And I think that's what everyone kind of think. You think true crime and you think that, and so much of true crime just actually isn't that. It would kind of be like saying, I think it would be like saying all horror is
slasher,
Saw.
Yeah.
You know, but like, all horror is Saw, the Saw franchise. I mean, there's quite a lot of that, but no, not all of it. And quite a lot of it's very different.
Yeah, this is kind of what led me to wanting to do something, and I still haven't quite figured out what I'm doing yet, so I feel very bad because my dad's like, I'm here when you're away.
I'm now thinking that we should write a heist together. I think that'd be really funny.
Be fun.
Like a heist, like podcast or something. That would be so fun. Can we do that?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I'll add another thing to my plate. That'll be fun.
Yeah. I'm only writing a podcast and setting up a game studio and finishing a novel. What? Before this, because people didn't know, we often have a little chat about what the nonsense we're doing, and Vivian is the busiest human being I've ever met in my life. And I say that as somebody who's quite busy.
I like doing things.
Everyone should go and see everything she's doing.
By the time this comes out, I'm pretty sure I'll be starting to ramp up my Substack, so you can go check me out over there, where I'll be giving you some kind of written material every single Tuesday at 5.
It's the point where at some point next year, where I go and play my demo, and then everyone needs to be worried.
But because basically the bit of true crimes that I have read, and then obviously listening to podcasts and stuff, it's a lot focused from the point of view of journalists. They tend to be the ones that are typically writing it, and I get it, because it would be like you say, even historically it was in magazines, it was in newspapers, it was, so that's the people who would be getting it. But there's a lot of how do I say this without making people really mad at me?
It's okay, because I can say the thing I'm going to say, which will make people really mad, but I come from a journalistic background. I was never a very good journalist, so like whatever. I'm fine. I'm good at what I do, but like I'm not like as good as some people. There's a lot of journalists who are a lot worse than me.
There's a lot of ethical issues in journalism,
yes.
and not all journalists are ethically questionable.
And there are some incredible journalists who do incredible work and do amazing research. And then there's the Daily Star and the Mirror and the Mail.
I think there was just a part of me that thought, you know, as an anthropologist, my ethics are looked at especially when I worked for a university. My ethics were under a microscope, and I've carried that with me even outside of the academic environment. I am very conscious of the fact that any time that I go to interview someone or talk to someone or attend a con or any time I am entering a space, even if it's a space that I probably would go to outside of my academic endeavors, I am changing that space. I am affecting that space, and I'm affecting the people around me. And everybody who talked to me with a certain level of trust that I need to hold and care for, because that's very important. And not all journalists have this same duty of care, I would say.
No. I mean, I think there's a really good recent example of this I think we talked briefly about it before, but the Tortoise investigation into Neil Gaiman's alleged assaults. The journalists who were involved in that initial investigation were not what seems to be the thing coming from the people they spoke to, is that their trust was not necessarily taken well. I don't know how to describe it, but there were issues involved in that. And while obviously it has led to these things moving forward and investigations and all this sort of thing, and other journalists taking it to consideration and treating it with the respect it deserves, that is not unusual. It's not unusual at all. It's just an example of an issue. Like when I say that, you know, I do pop culture journalism. People don't necessarily need to put trust in me. I talk about video games. You know, that's a very different thing to talking about people's lives. And that's why when I say there are better journalists out there than me, I don't want to be the journalist who goes and has people's trust put in them, because that's a very heavy burden to bear, and I would feel so bad if I didn't do it right, you know. And there are people out there who can bear that.
The thing about being an anthropologist is, and for anybody who is thinking about going into this field, it is something to know, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but something to keep in mind is that in every single study I have done, I have had at least one person cry during my interview. At least one. I have sometimes had more. And I have only studied pop culture stuff. I have only... Well, there was one exception to that when I was, like, doing a master's. I was more not in pop culture stuff. But since doing a PhD onwards, I was talking about online horror storytelling. I was talking about cosplay. I was talking about TTRPGs. Like, it's stuff that you wouldn't think of as triggering that kind of thing. But once you're sitting down with somebody and you're talking to them about their life and how their life is impacted by this thing, you do have that happen. And it's really important. But even beyond like that kind of an emotional connection, like Holly was somebody that I interviewed during my, both formally and informally. And there were things that you told me about your feelings in regards to a community or a certain person or how it was running or a particular con. And if I sat there and was like, oh yeah, Holly thinks all these people suck, and like mentioned I mean, that's not what happened. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah. I don't think I said anyone sucks.
No, you didn't. But if you had, and then I put your name on that and showed that around to everybody, that would suck for you. Like, that's not fair to you. But yeah, so I had this thought, and I still don't know what it'll look like, but I had a thought of what does it look like if an anthropologist were to write a true crime story? Because I'd be coming at it way more ethically when if I were to interview the family, which I don't, as it's going on, I don't know how much I'm going to be doing things like that. But if I were to taking that on, how much would I be anonymizing information? How much would I be safeguarding certain things? But also how much would I not be looking at the same stuff? Like you say, like there's a, criminologist talking about the brain thing, but what about the social things? What about the anthropological things? Like those aspects that sometimes aren't looked at. I mean, they are by there's sociologists specializing in criminology. There's some really amazing people doing that. In fact, one of them has been helping me with this research. So they definitely exist. But they typically are the ones writing academic papers. They're not typically the ones writing tradeback true crime books, and they're definitely not the ones that are typically. Please let me know if there is somebody doing that, but they're typically not on podcasts.
And I think that is because like this thing of what's going to grab the headline is always the thing of being salacious, and we know why. It's entertainment, isn't it? It's viewed as entertainment, and it goes right back to the thing of public executions and the Colosseum and all this sort of stuff. It's entertainment. Oh, I have so many thoughts about humans. But also, a gold heist on a train is fun. Hey, that's kind of Wild West cowboy nonsense. Can swing both ways.
There is something about like breaking the social norms and doing the thing that we've all kind of thought about. Like, I don't, maybe this is saying too much about myself, but have you ever done that thing of when you're in a shop and you're like, man, it'd be really easy to steal from the shop?
Yes.
And I mean, I never have. No. I never have, but you think it. I think that sometimes, because as a woman, a lot of people feel safe like letting their kid just like roam up to me.
Yeah.
And there was somebody that did that and kind of wasn't paying attention, and I looked down at this kid and I was like, I could kidnap this child. Like, I could kidnap this child right now and they wouldn't even question it. Like, they wouldn't know, because they were like, woman's safe. And I'm like, woman might not be safe. Woman could steal a child. Again, I would never steal a child because I hate children. But, like...
I'm just getting that thing of, would you steal a child? Like, I mean...
Would you download a kid? Yeah. But I have those thoughts, and there's something kind of interesting about, especially when no one does, at least no one normal, everyday civilian gets harmed.
Yeah. That
there is something like, oh, that's nice. That's nice to listen to and like be able to be like, oh, what if I did steal diamonds? What would that be?
Exactly. And like, there are just things where you go, what if I could be an international art thief? What if that could be a thing? What if I could just walk into somewhere and just take a painting off the wall and walk out? It's very entertaining.
So I get it. I think there's a large element of that.
And I think some of it with things like that is actually the bravado of it. Like, a lot of the time you have to have balls to do big heisty crimes, right? Like, okay, when I was a kid, I fully loved the TV show Hustle, which I don't know if you watched because it was very BBC and very noughties. But essentially it's a crime gang where they're fraudsters or whatever, and they basically, I'll describe it. They do fun heists where people get a comeuppance because they're rich, and they it'll always be, their target will always be someone who deserves it and all that kind of stuff. And it's very early noughties. I do recommend everyone watch it because it's ridiculous. Go in with the early noughties pinch of slight sexism, and the only girl in the show is our sexy girl who does sexy things. Which is ridiculous. But I loved it. It was so fun because it was always like, it was that Robin Hood kind of stealing from the rich and, we'll give to the poor, but also us because we're cool criminals. And that kind of bravado of the whole thing, I loved. I thought it was so fun. And I think that's part of the thing that, like, the kind of, like you said, nobody really got hurt. Some rich guy lost diamonds kind of heists. You just go like, oh, cool. You're Ocean's 11.
An Ocean's 11 style. Yeah.
Sometimes you learn some cool bits about history. Like, I've been recently listening to... So this is probably one of the few things where I would say it's like... I said I don't like things that are too modern. But I was listening to the one about the Salisbury poisonings recently because the case is just... it's been going through the courts. And that was fascinating because then you kind of get a lot of the interpolitical stuff with
next
Russian
time you're here, I can show you where it happened.
Ooh,
we walk past it a lot.
We go look at it and go, oh, that bench. Yeah. We're like, wow, I won't touch it.
I think they've removed the bench that used to be there.
I can imagine they probably did. That kind of stuff I think is very interesting as well because I think there's a historical, political current affairs kind of thing to it. And again, if it's well researched and well
and it's I think there's something really wonderful. So I moved to Salisbury in 2021, 2022, somewhere in there. So it was a couple of years, I think, after the poisoning at that point.
That was, I think, I want to say it was 2019, 2018, something like that.
Because it was pre-COVID.
It was, yes.
Yeah. And then I moved there COVID. So I was going to say post, but definitely not. But basically, when I moved here, it was still something that everyone talked about. Like it was a point of fascination for so many people, and they would talk about where they were when they heard about it. They would talk about knowing the family or not knowing the family, or like where people were, or like it was so interesting that like it was one of those things that I had kind of heard about quickly on the news but never really clocked in very detailed on. And then I moved here and everyone was talking about it. And I haven't really, it's kind of died down in the last like year or two, but every once in a while it pops back up again when there's say another news article about it or something like that. There's something about the community the community in Salisbury kind of comes together to discuss this thing that happened here.
And I mean, it was a really massive thing. For people who don't know, essentially a ex-KGB was...
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least supposedly.
Yeah. Ex-KGB member and his daughter were poisoned with a nerve poison of some description that affects people through the skin, through touch. They both survived, but another woman and her boyfriend, I want to say, who accidentally came across a bottle of this stuff that had just been left somewhere. She died, and he has been very severely disabled by it, because whoever did it just left it lying around. And I can imagine how scary that must have been at the time to think it's just out there somewhere.
Yeah, so this happened in Salisbury, and I think the KGB guy and his daughter were outside on a bench when...
They were just found,
Yeah. And so it's not like they were at home, they were out in public. And so there was a certain level of that. And so, there's a little park area that I walk past almost every day that is where it happened, so there's like certain levels of that kind of location space involved in it as well.
And I think also that is again that part of that thing of it could happen to me. I want to make sure it doesn't happen to me, because it feels, when it happens in a place, I mean, Salisbury is a city, but it's not huge.
It's not huge, no.
It's
a city because we have a cathedral, and that's kind of
it. In terms of things, it's a town. It just happens. Yeah. But it's a relatively small community in that regard, and it means that everybody's thinking, oh my god. And then when it did just happen, like, you kind of think, oh, that guy was in the KGB. Okay. He shouldn't have been poisoned, obviously, but there's that kind of element of like, I wasn't in the KGB, and then it just happened to somebody randomly. That must have been terrifying. And so you can kind of see why the true crime thing and people wanting to know about it and wanting to be interested in it, I can imagine that everybody was researching, everyone was looking into stuff, and whether they found true things or not, because research on the internet is skeptical. I can absolutely see why people were doing it. And I think that kind of thing of like, we live in a world that is relatively uncertain for most of us, and I think, or very uncertain for many. And so kind of going, oh, this person was murdered, I'm going to listen to it, and then I will know how not to have that happen to me. I think I can absolutely understand that. But I do think sometimes maybe people listen to too much of it and it becomes worrying, because the other thing that I think we haven't really touched on here is serial killer fandom and people who are obsessed with serial killers, and they just become like, everything about them is, and that's deeply, I find that very unsettling. I find, because it's like that, I think a lot of people who fall into that end up coming off true crime, and it's almost like the true crime stuff isn't enough. I don't know. It's a very interesting case point.
I think there's a bridge between the kind of two specific things of say the Salisbury poisoning and then some kind of serial killer, which is this idea of not really fully knowing the person next to you in in the wild, sitting at a cafe, and the guy next to you could be an ex-KGB. That feels crazy. Like, that feels like something that if I wrote about some random person in Salisbury being ex-KGB, no one would fucking believe it. And yet it was there. And the same thing of being, you know, what was her name? The one that was friends with Ted Bundy, who wrote a book of The Stranger Beside Me, I think was the name of the book. But she was friends with him and had no inkling, and well, she was co-workers, I think, with him.
Yeah.
And, you know, that idea of you're not really ever truly in some way knowing the person that you're sitting next to.
And I think that's probably one of the things that draws people to these, I hesitate to call them fandom spaces, but they often call themselves that. They are fandom spaces. Things like serial killers and stuff, and I think it's that in complete fascination of how can someone do this? I want to learn about it. I want to know about it. And I think that's a very interesting... I always find real people, like real person fandom in general, there are fine lines in it anyway. And so it's quite an interesting one, but we won't linger too much on it because I think it's not that fun to talk about serial killers. At least for me, I find it quite uncomfortable. I'm going to go back to jewel heists. They're fun. They're crazy. Do you have, other than the things we've already recommended, do you have one particular podcast that you think, or book, or documentary, that you think anybody who's interested in true crime, or maybe a particular kind of true crime, should give a go?
Well, like I said, I Do Go On is fun. They're Australian, and they have a lot of different, so they sometimes just do stories from history in general as well, so it's a nice little mix of different things, and like you said, there's a lot of connections. They've done one on Pinkertons
cool.
in general, and then they've done other ones that are about specific Pinkerton people and what the Pinkertons, because there's a lot when it comes to the Pinkertons. So if you're interested in the more historical stuff, those are always really fun, especially from Australians who have like no connection very frequently to a lot of this. And then obviously they do a lot of Australian history, and there's a lot of criminals in Australian history, so that's always fun because those aren't stories that I've heard. I have a book, there it is. Now, I have not read this yet, so it could be utter trash. But it sounds really fascinating, which is The Victorian Female Detective by Sarah Lodge, and it goes into the history of the actual women who worked as detectives and kind of the different things that they did, but also some of the moral ambiguities of them often catching other women, even when they knew that they weren't, say, at fault, but because it was a woman, or people that are LGBT that were often being pinpointed or were actually guilty of, you know, being LGBT. So it goes into a lot of that kind of stuff too. But the fact that a lot of the female detectives in history are not as discussed as the male ones. Yeah. And so this goes into a lot of the specific female detectives in Victorian England that were actually doing things. So that might be of interest, especially specifically for the kind of historical true crime stuff that you were talking about.
I was just checking the name of the podcast I wanted to recommend, and it's Crime Next Door, which is on BBC Sounds, but I think also on Spotify and lots of things. It's one of those ones that crosses over, and that's really interesting because each series they focus on that was where the Golden Toilet Heist was on that one. But they'll focus on various different cases that have happened that you said, that thing of if you wrote it down in the book, people would be like, that's ridiculous. One particular one was about a Croatian freedom fighter who had moved to Scotland, and an assassin came to try and kill him in a sleepy little Scottish town kind of thing while he was fighting for Croatian freedom from his attic, which is just a really fascinating thing to listen to. And there have been various different cases, and some of them are more kind of murder focused than others. So there's a few different ones on there that you can kind of get your teeth into, and you can decide how much gore or not you want, depending on the series. The other one I do really like, which is also because I do actually think that a lot of the true crime I listen to is ones that have either been picked up by the BBC or made by the BBC.
Yeah, Holly is not a BBC plant, we promise.
No, I promise. It's just because I find it very difficult, particularly with true crime investigations, to listen to ones where they're doing current investigations that aren't through a news service. And that's not to say that news services don't have bias, but they are more regulated by things like Ofcom. We're not regulated by Ofcom, so people can set up a podcast and kind of just tell you anything they want. So for my recommendations on true crime, they are going to be, because I like those ones, the ones that have that sort of journalistic investigation. They're from the BBC or
I have a weird extra addendum, because as you were talking about that, I was like, oh, actually, it's
BBC,
true crime adjacent. I guess technically it's true crime, but there's a podcast for people who like my more reality TV side of my life when I bring it up. There's a podcast called The Bravo Docket, and it's two lawyers, and they go through the actual legal cases of people in reality television. So they have done a lot of contemporary cases, but they go through the actual legal documents and they read them directly, like word for word, and then explain what it means, and they explain what the processes are and how the legal system works. But also it means that you get to hear these like juicy crime things that these reality TV stars are up to. So I highly suggest that one, because that one's just a bit fun.
There are several. Like, there's a really great one by Joanne McNulty. She's a comedian, where she investigated whether Avril Lavigne had been switched.
That was a conspiracy theory in the...
Yeah, that one was very fun.
I remember ages ago now, I was telling my friend about the Free Britney thing. This was before it got picked up, and there was a whole documentary before any of that. It was when it was a weird internet conspiracy that I had stumbled on of #Free Britney, and I was telling my friend about it at an academic conference, because I don't sleep well at academic conferences, so I tend to go down weird internet rabbit holes while I'm there.
Valid.
So I came out the next day tired, drinking coffee and eating a free breakfast, being like, let me tell you about #Free Britney. So I was explaining this whole thing and how like she was giving clues to people in her Instagram pictures. Like they would say like, if you are in trouble, wear yellow in your next Instagram, and she would wear yellow, and like she was actually communicating through these different means. And I think at the time that I picked it up, her son had just come out being like, no, really, like we need to help her, and people were kind of not listening to him, and it was like this whole thing, right? And I was telling my friend about it, and all he could do was laugh and be like, yeah, remember Avril Lavigne? And I was like, no, this is different. I think this is different. But it was kind of relegated to the same internet conspiracy world, and it was one of those things. Then it became a huge true crime.
And also, the funniest thing was that when the Free Britney thing turned out to be real, everyone then was like, wait, is the Avril Lavigne thing real too?
Yeah,
like it was almost like,
what about all the other things?
Yeah, because they're on this like these very low level conspiracy theory things, and if one of them is actually true, it's like, wait.
Like my world is shattered.
I know.
I still bring that up to him, and every once in a while I was like, do you remember when I told you about Free Britney and you didn't believe me? And he's like, I know.
I've enjoyed this. This has been fun. I feel like I started the episode being like, I'm not sure about true crime, and then I'm like, also this. Okay. Like, no, I think I do. It's just I like a really specific brand of true crime, which is...
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to whatever we do next. I can't remember. I feel like I never remember what we do. I have to go and check every time.
I do have the list, but I don't remember if I actually wrote it down or not. I did not write it down. I have it somewhere else, though. It'll be something interesting.
It will. It may need me to send an email. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I'm glad you were here. We've had a great time. And we will be in your ears again in 2 weeks. Or just under that if you're on our Patreon. Remember, we have a Patreon. You can sign up to the Patreon. We're going to have a lovely time. I will remember to update our social media soon. Now that I am out of manuscript hell and into editing hell, which is an entirely different kettle of fish.
And I am going to be getting into essay hell. So go follow Incidental Mythology on Substack.
Do it.
For people who don't know, Incidental Mythology is the brand that I do a lot of essays on pop culture and mythology under. There's a video essay channel that blew up with my last one. Holy crap! I think I can technically say it went viral because of the amount of views that it has received.
That's
it's
amazing.
Crazy. I am nearing 90,000 views at the moment.
Wow.
I'm sure it'll have passed that by the time this comes out. So yeah,
Congratulations.
go check out Incidental Mythology.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Go do it. Go. And then listen to more, or go back and listen to all our episodes again. So, goodbye, guys.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast, and do give it a share. Tell your friends, family, fellow fans. Get the word out however you feel like you can. You can follow us on social media. Links are in the show notes, as well as some links to further reading for anyone who might be interested. Music for this episode was Nowhere Land by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. This episode was produced by Vivian Asimos and Holly Swinyard. Oh,
do we have an object? True crime object. That feels like something we ought to not have.
I have my dad's case files. Do I still have those? Yes.
Redacted.
These are what he sent me. They are unmarked CDs.
Love it. Okay, that's
I have it. 2 of them.
There we go. That's the object.
How fucking redacted ass type of. All right, sorry.
That's about as redacted as you can get, right?
I know. It's like, this looks so shady, Dad. What are you doing?
Send it through the post. Okay.